And less than 24 hours after Darkmoon Faire miniset was released, Tiller OTKs in both Warlock and in Priest have been exploding onto the metagame. Is it a problem? Let's find out. But before we begin, if you aren't already subscribed, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so that way you never miss a future upload when it comes out. Now let's jump into Wretched Tiller OTK decks. It is still unclear if the deck will be tier 1, but there are some major issues with the deck and how it operates. The deck is extremely similar to the playstyle of previous Snip Snap builds, where you aim to draw out your combo pieces as quickly as possible, and sometimes you have possibilities of performing this OTK as early as turn 4 or turn 5. When playing this deck myself, hitting lethal on turn 7 was actually extremely common if I went up against the right opponent. I had a 73% win rate with the build that I made myself, and honestly, I'm not exactly a meta breaker, and even I was able to pilot this deck pretty easily due to the fact that against the right matchups and against slow decks, nothing can really play around the Tiller HELLSCREAM combo. So imagine how easy this combo is if you have an optimized build like some of these lists that I'm going to throw up here from like Hijo and some from the China scene. But again, like these aren't necessarily the best decks for these archetypes. These are just the best ones that have performed in the first 24 hours of the release. And yet these decks are still a problem and causing so much chaos and honestly a lot of negative emotions from losing these games. If you are insane enough to sit through the entire animation process, and if you win with the combo, you literally have to sit there and wait for everything to resolve, it takes 2.5–3 minutes for the animations to finish before you're even allowed to click out of the game. This is something that needs to be fixed immediately for quality of life reasons, very similar to Day 1 Witchwood Shutterwalk animations completely plaguing anyone who went up against the deck. I think we can all agree on that. However, the community is concerned more about the behind-the-scenes conversations that the designers had about this deck. This is purely speculation, but let's put on our detective hat and break it down. When I posted this combo on Twitter almost immediately after the Darkmoon Faire miniset was released, somebody had tagged Celestion asking if this was something that the devs were aware of before they released the cards. And it seems like they knew about this combo. It's hard to say if they knew just how powerful the deck was or if they did know how much this combo would actually shake up the meta. From what I can tell, it seems that Ixar and the rest of the team knew that this was a good consistent combo based on his reply here. But it's still unclear if they're happy with this deck being present in the meta, since they said that they would keep an eye out on it. This would also explain why no wild balance changes were made if they were anticipating a deck like this being dominant. If they were unsure how the top meta decks would be able to contend with this deck in particular, this idea makes sense. But the question remains, now that this deck is actually popular on ladder, how problematic is it as an archetype? It turns out it's becoming more problematic as more people pick up the deck. The main issue that people have is the lack of interactivity that the games actually have when you're playing this kind of strategy. Slow control players, memers, and anyone that's not actively trying to counteract this deck is going to get destroyed by this combo. Sometimes you can't even develop a board against this deck, so how are you able to set up a victory? And some of these combos are able to be activated as early as turn 5, turn 6. So like if you're not killing this deck in the mid game, you're always worrying about dying to the combo, and that's just a feeling that a lot of players do not like in Hearthstone. But the worst part about this combo that needs to be fixed right now is the interaction with Ice Block. You guys know that I'm not a fan of Secret Mage, and as hilarious as an occurrence that this is, that, you know, Ice Block can actually be countered to a degree, it demands a hotfix because this is clearly an exploit. If you wait until the rope in order to play the Tiller combo with double Death Speaker against a mage with Ice Block, then the animations will literally take so long to resolve that it will literally skip the mage's turn, effectively making their Ice Block useless because your opponent doesn't get to do anything to make use of the lethal turn being skipped. It's very similar to how Nor's Dorma with Dragon Portals used to work, and this is something that needs to be fixed very similar to how that was fixed. And that's not even going into how bad this must feel in order to lose to this deck over and over and over and over again if it actually becomes a driving force in the meta. As much as I love combo decks, this deck is really pushing people outside of their comfort zones when it comes to losing, and I'll be covering this topic in a future video, but in the comments below, let me know what your guys' opinions are about losing a game in Hearthstone and what you believe is a fair loss. In other words, what strategies do you not mind losing to? For me personally, I don't mind losing a control mirror whenever I know that I played poorly because that literally the better player won that game, and I always feel better about a Hearthstone match in a game like that where the better player often wins. But regardless, I will be covering that topic in a future video. Before I get into my opinion on whether or not I believe this deck should be nerfed, I want to talk about the duality of Hearthstone combo decks, discuss possible nerfs that might please people that despise this archetype, and also suggest some ideas that might help balance both standard and wild in the future coming expansions. Hearthstone combo decks, or really all combo decks in all card games, have this extremely awkward balance point that they have to achieve, where combo players can realistically pop off their OTKs, but it's not so easy to where the game feels like solitaire. But on the other hand, if the combo itself is so negative for the other player, even if the deck is so complicated or requires some kind of weird progress to achieve the, the required results, it may not matter if you win or lose with the combo deck because your opponent is just going to have a bad time playing up against this kind of archetype depending on what you're playing. So this is kind of the duality of the Hearthstone combo decks that we've seen in the past. We may now have this new deck that's consistent in killing people in ways that we've never seen before, but at the beginning of the games against this archetype in particular, the player is already not happy if they know that they're fighting this deck. Like, it's a classic case of where one person's joy is another person's sorrow, and sadly, this is just the existence of combo decks. I win, I happy, I lose, me mad. But losing to any combo is going to feel bad in the right situation. Like, really the point that I'm trying to make with these observations is that combo decks in Hearthstone can't be so toxic or so BM of a strategy that can happen this consistently. And sometimes it can be hard to, know where exactly the line needs to be drawn, but when it comes to infinite loops becoming meta, I feel like the excitement of these kind of strategies die out very, very quickly. My biggest suggestion is to try and cut back on 0 mana interactions and infinite loops as they are the easiest to break, especially in Wild. Now let's move on to potential nerfs because in my opinion there are a lot of conflicting issues with wanting any of these cards nerfed. The first thing that comes to people's mind is just a straight up nerf Hysteria, which I don't think the devs really want to do, and honestly I don't want to see this card nerfed either. Aside from this combo, Hysteria is such an interesting card that I would love to see it played in more different ways. And if we nerf it immediately to either 4 or 5 mana, when you compare it to other cards like it, it just really doesn't make the cut. Not to mention, it's extremely easy for Priest in particular to discount spells with the new cards that they got, like Palm Reading. So if they decided to nerf this combo, I would not want to see them nerf Hysteria itself. I would like to see either DeathSpeaker or Tiller nerfed if this deck demands it. This is just a classic Hearthstone problem where one card in the past haunts us by being the perfect card for some kind of insane OTK combo setup. As cool as the DeathSpeaker into a minion and then Hysteria into that minion to kill the whole board actually is as a combo and board clear, it will never actually be a realistic combo that people go for because Tiller exists. This card will just never likely see play in this kind of fashion. Wretched Tiller and DeathSpeaker have never seen this high of competitive play since they were printed in the Knights of the Frozen Throne expansion. If one didn't complement the other so well, I would say that maybe bumping up the mana cost of these cards would maybe help alleviate this situation with this kind of deck. But with all the mana discounts that Warlock and Priest have at their disposal, especially Priest, I'm really not sure if this would actually get rid of the Tiller OTK, and it might still be a problem that arises in the future. So I don't think that nerfing Tiller or even changing DeathSpeaker to 4 or 5 mana is really going to be able to solve the problem that this deck creates. And honestly, if you want my opinion, I think the best thing to do would be to remove one of these cards, and I think it would have to be Wretched Tiller, as it's the card that's actively killing people. I can't imagine the ridiculous amount of hoops that designers have to jump through when trying to create some new strategies because of literally what's happening right now. 1 or 2 cards from the past just completely working with the card perfectly to enable like one of the most busted combos that we've ever seen. But I think it would make it easier on everyone, especially the players and the community and the designers as well, if we were to just simply get rid of these problematic cards so that way these kind of OTKs are not enabled if the game cannot handle these kind of combos. Magic the Gathering has done this, Yu-Gi-Oh has done this several times, but more importantly, Battlegrounds has literally done this with heroes and with minions that were either deemed worthless or overpowered by players. So why can't the same be done for Standard? Like, this isn't just really a criticism, this is more so of a question, but what is so bad about getting rid of like the few problematic cards in Hearthstone that create these kind of combos, especially if the community doesn't like it? Like, we have the Hall of Fame, which is essentially what I guess Standard was trying to accomplish in that department, but I'm fairly confident that there isn't going to be several people that are going to feel betrayed if Tiller actually has to leave the game in order to improve the quality of life of Wild as a format. Like, the same thing kind of happened with Turtle Mage, so I wouldn't be surprised if this was something that would actually come up from players. I would actually like to know what you guys think of this idea, because this is something that has not really been done in Hearthstone's history, and that's something that the Hearthstone really likes to do, is separate itself from the other card games. But I really do believe it would make things easier to balance, and we would have less infuriating decks like this pop up if this kind of strategy was implemented. Lastly, I believe the Blizzard designers should sit back and reflect on the process that they have on designing their cards. Most likely, there are several agendas, due dates, and time restraints that, that prevent them from being able to do everything they want to do with Hearthstone, down from like adding flavor text to fixing bugs. But I believe it is in the game's best interest to bring more high-ranking, very skilled deck builders to help catch these interactions that could potentially break the game. I know for a fact there would be several people lining up to help with this process, including myself, and Nate Dogg and Mike Lowe from the BornToBeWild podcast is actually someone who's voiced their concern about this on Twitter, and I know that Zeddy has brought up this topic before on his YouTube channel, but I really do believe that this is a great idea. At least, I believe it's worth the consideration, as Ixar himself said that they would like to have more, quote, consumer research on Wild, his words, not mine. And honestly, sometimes you just need one person to point out a problem card or problem interaction before it becomes game-breaking. And I really do believe if they were to bring on, or even like just consult, some of the highly skilled players that play this game almost every single day that would maybe catch these kind of actions before they become a problem, it would be nothing but healthy for the development of the game. You might need to make some deals and some agreements to make sure that nothing gets leaked out, which I imagine is a very good case against this in particular. But I believe a compromise could be easily made to make sure that we have more high-ranking and active and passionate players helping the designers to help lighten up their workload, because it just seems like a massive benefit to me that has no downsides as long as nothing gets leaked. So after all of this, do I believe the deck should be nerfed? Some people are probably going to hate my response, but I believe the meta needs more time to settle before we decide to nuke this deck to the ground. I believe I have brought up enough points about this deck to prove that it is problematic and demands immediate hotfixes for the glitches and exploits that are still possible. Not to mention that most people are still torching for this deck's nerf. But I really do believe that the devs need more time to properly assess the meta with the new Darkmoon mini set cards that have been printed to make sure that if balance changes are needed, we don't just wind up with the same meta that we had before with Secret Mage, Dark Lair, and Reno Priest just completely dominating. Because then more people will be completely unsatisfied with that, and I just want to try and make sure that, that is completely avoided. Because the last thing that we want is a balance change, go back to what we used to have, and then more people are upset because of it. But that is my take on the Tiller OTK situation. I think that we need a little bit more time before we decide to actually nerf the deck to the ground. But if this deck were to be nerfed, I would not be upset. Like, this is a nerf that would be warranted, very similar to Turtle Mage, and I would be more than welcome to have this happen, even though I enjoy playing this deck. And feel free to let me know what you guys think in the comments below, as I would love to have a conversation with you guys. This is the very first time that I'm doing an in-depth video to this degree, and I would love to do more like it, so if you guys want to see more videos like this, feel free to let me know. Until next time, I hope you guys have fun with the meta outside of these, these Tiller OTKs, and we'll see you for the next video.